Welcome to Cinema on a Shelf, a podcast about movies and physical media. My name is Matt, and thank you for spending some time with me instead of watching a movie. I promise I will try to make it worth your time. And thank you for joining me for the second episode of Cinema on a Shelf. Thank you so much to those of you that listened into the first one, kind of introducing this whole concept podcast that we have starting here. And in this episode, I wanted to elaborate a little more on the idea of collecting physical media, not necessarily just how to get into it or why people would get into it, as we talked about last time. In this episode, I want to sort of talk about two parts of collecting, specifically the how or different ways to collect physical media and where you can collect physical media, whether it be online or in person. As I go through this, I think there's a big point that I want to emphasize with it, and tried to make this as close to comprehensive as I could about different, ways to collect in different places. But there is no one quote-unquote right way to be a physical media collector. You can collect movies on disc in a variety of different ways, and no one person collects everything the same way. I know I don't even collect the same way that I used to 20 something years ago when I started my own physical media collection. This changes, and there are certain ways that I like to collect, or maybe different places that I like to go to try and find or buy movies, and that can change. It's kind of part of the fun of this hobby to be able to discover someplace new that you didn't know about that has a bunch of movies that you've always wanted to find. So wanted to again kind of break this episode into those two halves, the how and the where, as far as collecting physical media. I will probably talk a little bit about some personal experiences and some personal preferences and ways that I maybe collect, or places that I collect in some of this, because again, I want to highlight that there is no one specific way to do absolutely everything of this, and it doesn't mean that any of these are something that you have to do. It's a little bit up to you, and each way that you go about this has its own advantages, disadvantages. Everything will work a little bit differently for everyone. So just want to emphasize that before we do start talking about it in this episode today. Thinking about the different ways that you could go about collecting physical media was kind of fun to try and define and break it down into certain categories, because it did give me a chance to sort of evaluate or think about like my own ways of collecting and how much some of these apply to me now, and maybe some that I don't really do but would potentially want to get into, or maybe make more of a habit of doing. So it was sort of fun to come up with this list. And this list really is in not a particular order. There's no order of importance or anything like that. But just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you could do if you're starting a collection, or if you have a collection and want to keep collecting. The first way that I wrote down in my notes to talk a little bit about is collecting your favorites. And I think if you're doing any kind of collecting, if it's movies on physical media, if it's comic books, if it's Pokemon cards, if it's records, anything like that, collecting your favorites is probably one of the first things that comes to mind. I know with people that are wanting to get into movies on physical media, they probably would want to have movies that they would want to watch over and over and over again to get the most value out of them, and to be able to watch it whenever you want, not time dependent on when it's on TV or where it might be on streaming, and if you're subscribed to the right streaming service at the time, or if it changes streaming services. There's a lot of reasons to own some of your favorite movies. If it's something that you watch again and again, then yeah, it makes perfect sense to want to have a copy of it. If it's something that you watch repeatedly, maybe during a certain time of the year, say Christmas time, or maybe a time like Thanksgiving where you get a bunch of family members together, or Maybe you have a time where you're gathering a lot of friends and you love certain movies or even TV shows that you do like to watch sort of as a communal ritual, or maybe with you and a partner. So, setting out to collect your favorites is a pretty good place to start and is probably the most baseline urge as a collector that we all have had at different times. Now, favorites can mean a lot of different things. I mentioned about movies you watch again and again and again. Your favorites can also be movies that you absolutely love that maybe you don't watch all the time, but you feel that it is something that's important to you and you want to own. I know I do this specifically with a lot of music as well, that if I have a favorite album that I maybe don't revisit as much, maybe it's too heavy or it's not an all the time or a more frequent kind of listen, I do still like to own a copy of it so that I can listen to it when I want to. And I know there's a lot of movies that I really love that are a little more difficult watches at times, but I do like to have them on physical media because they are a favorite, even if they're not the most repeated viewing experiences that I have. But favorites mean different things to different people, and I think it's a way that a lot of people do like to collect, or maybe at least like to start collecting. Another way to go about collecting things that you are going to watch is to actually go about collecting what you want to watch. That seems really repetitive, so I guess I can explain what I mean by that. What I mean by this is maybe movies that you have watched before and you know you would want to watch again and again, or maybe it's a movie you have not seen before and you do want to watch it for the first time. You can go out and blind buy this movie on Blu-ray or DVD or 4K and watch it that way. It's a pretty good way to be able to actually watch a lot of movies without having to have the resources or maybe access to a movie theater or even specific streaming services. You know, if you're just wanting to watch one movie and you haven't seen it before, going out and buying a disc for it is not a bad way to build your collection. There are some drawbacks to this, of course. Obviously, if you do watch a lot of movies, collecting every movie you want to watch is sometimes not always feasible and sometimes not always financially responsible. And that's completely fair. I know I do this with a certain amount of movies, even with new movies that have a little bit of time between their theatrical release and coming out on their home video or their physical media versions or even streaming. I have done it where the first time I've watched it is by buying the disc itself. The risk you do run with doing something like that is that you maybe won't enjoy the movie as much as you think you will. So potentially you could end up owning a movie, or at least having the DVD or Blu-ray for a movie that you don't think you'll maybe watch again or you didn't enjoy at all. And that can be a problem because what do you do with it exactly? But there are ways potentially around something like that, whether it is giving it to a friend or even selling it somewhere like eBay or Facebook Marketplace to get back some of your money. There are ways that if you do choose to collect what you want to watch and have something you don't like, you can get around that and keep the stuff that you do really enjoy. Those are two of kind of the I guess maybe most common types of collecting, but there's a lot of ways to get a little bit creative with your collection and really start to focus in and be intentional about certain parts of what you want in your collection. One of those is to focus in on something specific. And there are a few ways that I think are really kind of interesting to focus in on something that you enjoy about movies and then go about collecting in that way. One of them would be to collect by a favorite actor, somebody that you really enjoy watching maybe regardless of what movie they're in. If you're a big fan of Meryl Streep, maybe you want to see as much as you can of the films that Meryl Streep has been in. This can go even for older actors that maybe were in a bunch of different older movies that you just connect with their style, even though you may not have been alive when they were making movies, all the way up to somebody more modern that you just really enjoy and want to see everything that they're doing and follow them along the journey that they're currently making. This is kind of fun and a way that personally I didn't really do a lot of collecting in this way until maybe a little bit more recently. And I don't have a lot of this tendency. There are certain actors that I think personally I do really enjoy watching, but I never really sought out to collect everything by a specific actor until more recently when I've started to think a little bit more about some of that. And there's one actor in particular that I've started to collect a few more movies from. And he's one of my favorite actors of all time for a variety of reasons. And that's James Cagney, someone that had a real flourishing career starting in the 1930s as a kind of tough guy gangster movie actor in a lot of those like early gritty Warner Brothers films like The Public Enemy and Angels with Dirty Faces and The Roaring Twenties. He would go on to have a really varied career. He was a uniquely talented actor that used to do not only again these tough guy personas, but also could sing and dance and play a somewhat romantic lead and was funny and could do all of these in some of these performances. Very famous movies he is in, like Yankee Doodle Dandy, where he is the musical performer and dancer. He has a very unique dancing style. You know, if you have seen any of the films that he is in doing dancing, he has this very interesting, almost like straight-legged version of dance steps, which is really quite unique and not something you saw a lot of back in those days, or even since those days. It's kind of uniquely his own. But he also had a real physicality to not only his dancing, but any of the things that he would do, even in a movie like The Public Enemy, where, you know, he is just the way he's moving in and amongst the violent acts of a gangster is very rhythmic and is those of someone who has been kind of trained in some somewhat classical dance styles. You can tell because it's very intentional and it's sort of this lyrical, strangely lyrical movement within these very violent movies. He also plays unhinged very well. One of the most amazing performances for me in movie history is him in the movie White Heat. He plays a really unhinged, deranged character in a way that is quite frightening in a lot of parts of it, and you really feel the frayed nerves of his character Cody Jarrett. Because of that, and because he did have a point where he kind of slowed down from making movies, he didn't have the super long career that a lot of other actors have had. And even though he does have a huge amount of movies, I mean, they made a ton of movies in the 1930s and 40s, just by the way the studio system was. There's a lot that I haven't seen of his, but everything I've ever seen of his movies, I've really enjoyed, even if the movie wasn't great, just watching him. So for me, collecting by actor has taken on a bit of a thing with James Cagney movies, and there's some that I've recently purchased, such as Strawberry Blonde and Man of a Thousand Faces, that I haven't seen before, and I'm really looking forward to diving into those and just seeing what James Cagney, the actor, can do with them. Another popular way to collect movies at this point is to collect movies by franchise. I would say this is more popular, or has become more popular in the more recent times, because franchise movie making is a lot more of a thing currently than it ever has been. there have been different times in the world where franchises like James Bond, who have been around and are still around, creating movies. But now, obviously, with the invent of, the Lord of the Rings, the Hunger Games, the Harry Potter films, all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and DC Universe stuff with comic book movies, other franchised opportunities for especially movies that are based on book series, they seem to be, even though their popularity maybe isn't at the high point it used to be, it's still happening with a lot of regularity. And even movie franchises like Mission Impossible that have been around for a long time, it's pretty popular at this point, and there are a lot of people that will really enjoy certain franchises and will go about collecting all of them. Collecting all the James Bond movies, for example, has been something that collectors have done for a very long time. In fact, going back prior to physical media at that point, because James Bond started in the 1960s. So collecting by franchise is something that a lot of people will be interested in as well, to go back and revisit certain movies over and over again. People that love Star Wars will want to see them again and again. And even though they are readily available to stream, some people will still really enjoy having the library of the Star Wars films that now have even branched out into TV shows, with shows like The Mandalorian and Andor, or even spin-off films. So a lot can be categorized by a franchise, and if you enjoy that franchise, collecting it might be a thing for you. Another really popular way to collect by something specific like this is to collect by genre. And this one is really, really intriguing, and there are people that are really big fans of certain genres that also seem to have a really big crossover with being physical media collectors. The one specifically that I'm thinking of is horror movies. Horror movie fans, ever since the days of VHS, have seemed to really love to have horror films on physical media. And whether it was finding them at a video store or owning any horror movie that they can find, it's a genre that if people love it, they really, really love it, and may have a lot of films they go back to again and again and again. And this is especially true for people that aren't just films of the big budget horror movies, but lower budget films that used to have a real ecosystem in physical media, especially back in the VHS days, of having a medium that you could reproduce pretty cheaply, even make movies for quite cheaply, and then not have to worry about theater distribution. Just putting it direct to VHS was sort of a thing in certainly in the 80s and 90s. And this has carried over into the horror genre and still continues to this day. There's a real kind of rich tradition of low budget horror films that, even though it's not my thing personally, there are a huge amount of collectors that will really dive into this, especially a lot of specialty labels that really get into the low budget horror style stuff. So collecting by genre can be really interesting with this. Some genres appeal more than others for certain collectors. Like I said, horror movie collectors seem to have a big appeal to getting those on physical media. There's also a big following for other genres like film noir and the physical media collector space. If you're unfamiliar, film noir is a style of kind of crime film that came about in the 1940s originally, that used a lot of the sort of darker aspects of society, maybe the seedy underbelly of organized crime, or people doing things that were not very moral, and it was sort of getting at the dark part of the human psyche, and they would show that on screen a lot of times with very, very dark cinematography and lighting and shadows. And basically they became known as film noir by the French term for these kind of darker or blacker films with bleaker subject matter. And film noir has really resonated across film history as a style. Some of the greatest movies of all time are in the film noir genre, and they're still making films today that you could consider as quote unquote film noir. And there has been a lot of effort put into not only releasing a lot of film noir, but also restoring a lot of these films in really, really nice editions in 4K. One of the best things about the 4K, like Ultra HD formatting, is how rich and deep the darker colors can be. So really, really dark blacks and grays in the cinematography can look amazing on 4K. So there's probably a little bit of that, but also just a style that people get really into. If people were into, the Mickey Spillane novels, the pulp novels of certain eras, and maybe are still fascinated with them, film noir is cinema's version of that. And a lot of these films have lasted the test of time. In fact, some of them that are kind of rediscovered also really hold up very, very well. And there's some people that are doing some really great job of restoring these films, unearthing these films. I know specifically the Noir Foundation is one that I've seen pop up again and again. I actually have some releases that they've been involved with through a couple of different boutique labels. And the Noir Foundation has been great for this. This gentleman by the name of Eddie Muller, who I believe heads up the Noir Foundation, or at least I've seen him on special features of some of the physical media releases I have. And he's been on Turner Classic Movies, on TCM a lot as well, introducing certain films. The Noir Foundation has actually done a lot to even bring about quote-unquote lost films. For whatever reason, film noir seemed to be a type that at one point in Hollywood history was a little bit disposable, or because it was lower budget and maybe wasn't as widely seen, was just seen as films that people wouldn't be interested in preserving or saving. One of many genres, I suppose. And they've been responsible for unearthing and restoring and kind of bringing to light these films that were sort of considered lost and undiscovered. I know I have one in my collection that is a more recent purchase of a Flicker Alley Blu-ray release of an Argentinian film noir called The Bitter Stems, which is one that the Noir Foundation was involved with, quote unquote, saving and bringing light to. And before there was a physical media release, they actually did a lot of theatrical showings and brought it around, I think, throughout the world to show people this film that was kind of little seen outside of Argentina. And it is phenomenal. And now there's a whole new generation of people that get to discover films like this. When you go through each of these genres, if you become a fan of some of these things, if you're an action movie fan, you can start to really dive in and go like, well, if I like this, I probably will like this. And it becomes something that you can get into again and again and again. You can also look at collecting certain movies from maybe a region of the world or from a specific era of movie making, or even a little bit of both. Maybe you decide you want to get really into French New Wave films from the 1960s, the Nouvelle Vague. There's a lot of people that will get really interested in that style of that era and go specifically to that. Or maybe, Japanese films or samurai films or Hong Kong action movies from the 80s and 90s in that kind of John Woo style or era, that they were really, really popular, and they were creating some of the most interesting in that genre in that part of the world. So there's a lot of people that will also go towards those sorts of things, or maybe discover something that they liked about a film movement of a certain time period in a certain country and decide to collect a lot in and around there. I think that's a more unique to maybe somebody that's into a niche of something, or a certain era, or anything like that, that maybe you can kind of drill down into a little bit more. It's great for being a collector because you can get really, really specific about that, to say like, I want to drill down into Ealing comedies, and you really get into a certain era of films from the UK, and hearing some of these uproarious comedies that have gone on to inspire so many throughout history, that you can be as specific as you want when you're looking at an era or a region. I think probably I don't know if I would want to call it the most popular, because I have no data to back this up, but I think there's something that a lot of people in the physical media collecting space have either heard or maybe have gotten into, is collecting by film director. The film director has a sort of status, and certainly has over the past number of decades, of being kind of the author of the film. And over the years, certain filmmakers have really gained a big status as somebody that is providing something really unique, or having a vision that you can thread from film to film with them, which in some directors' cases has always been the case. In other directors, of the classic Hollywood era, there were some that were much more of a chameleonic persona in what they did, or a little more workmanlike. I'm thinking maybe of someone like a Michael Curtiz, who very famously directed Casablanca, but also directed every kind of film and genre and actor, actress that you could imagine. They covered so much ground. George Cukor would have been somebody very similar to Michael Curtiz, in that they could go into almost any kind of subject matter and have something to offer as a filmmaker. As opposed to someone maybe like Martin Scorsese or Stanley Kubrick or Ingmar Bergman, where even though they would make films in different genres and with different people, often you can tell that it is one of their films. They have a certain style, maybe they have a certain method of framing, or maybe a specific type of shot that they use a lot. I'm thinking with Martin Scorsese of some of the fast zoom in shots, or some of the pans of someone like David Lean across really wide landscapes, or someone like Quentin Tarantino with using a lot of very fast-paced, snappy dialogue that is also filled with a lot of pop cultural references. There's a lot of filmmakers that have signature touches that people will resonate with. And getting into collecting by director is something that I think if you're somebody that's into film, it's pretty natural to want to discover a director you love and see everything you can by them. So it does make sense that those same people would want to own those films all together, to be able to, I don't know, maybe do a movie marathon of one specific director that they love, or watch all of them and compare and contrast with other people they know, or even make a list. There's lots of articles and videos and podcasts out there that talk about ranking filmographies of a specific director. Shout out to the Blank Check podcast. I've listened to quite a few episodes of Griffin and David doing Blank Check, and that's the idea, is they really dive into a director's filmography, who at some point they got a quote-unquote blank check to make kind of the films they wanted to do without too much meddling, or with some belief from a studio, which you don't often get. So there's a real big desire to collect by director. Personally, this is probably the one I do. I don't know if it's more than any of the other ones I've mentioned so far, but one that I've always been very conscious of doing. There are specific directors that I may discover, or I may know that I already love, and do make collections around their films and wanting to have as much as I can of them. I know I do have a couple of directors where I do own a physical copy of everything they've done. I think specifically the two I can think of are Stanley Kubrick and Quentin Tarantino. There are a good number of directors that I love and do try to seek out their films. One very specifically that right now I'm actually trying to seek out a lot of their films is someone that I've always loved, and I don't know if in the last couple of years it's maybe really crystallized how much I do love this director, but it's Billy Wilder, who is an incredibly well-known director, made some of the best and most famous films of specific eras. The Apartment is one of my favorite films of all time. Billy has also done Some Like It Hot, Sabrina. Oh, there's so many. Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity. He earlier on was involved as a writer with Ernst Lubitsch and wrote films like Ninotchka. And he has also done a good number of films with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, The Front Page, The Fortune Cookie. He's wonderful, and he has a sense of humor that I've always really resonated with, both as a screenwriter and a director. I love Billy Wilder's films, and gradually I've been collecting almost everything that he's done. I don't know what I'm up to now. I think I'm getting close to about 16 or 17 of his films now. And am actively looking out for more. In fact, there's some that I haven't even seen before that I'm really looking forward to getting to check out through this little journey of collecting Billy Wilder's films on physical media. So that's something that I think a lot of physical media collectors do. And if it's something that you latch onto, or you have a director specifically that you really enjoy the films of, is a great way to be able to not only check out their films, but also kind of show your fandom and say, yeah, I want to see everything that this person has directed, or, as I said, other cases, this actor has done, or maybe everything in a franchise. I think it's a really unique way to collect. Another great way that a lot of people, myself included, do like to build a collection is to collect by the label, or boutique label, as the case may be. I mentioned in my first episode that one of the special things about movies on physical media is that there are a lot of editions that are either special editions or limited editions or extended editions that can be made on a physical media release. And collecting these special editions is also something that a lot of people get really into. If you have a film that you love and is your favorite, not only might you want it at home, but you might also want the most to do with that. So if you want to see a lot of, behind the scenes documentaries or extra interviews or commentary tracks, or you really want to dive into that film, some of those special editions can do a really great job of maybe adding a bonus disc of extra material, or maybe having a director's cut that's extended, or some, long lost version of something that has maybe added in some deleted scenes, or, there's hundreds and hundreds of different ways that you can create these editions to make them special. This may also mean having a big edition with maybe a booklet, or some essays that you can read to sort of deepen your knowledge about that film, or the filmmaker, or the actors, or maybe how the film was made. You can also have ones that maybe include a copy of the screenplay, which you can have a look at and read and maybe see what the original screenplay looked like as opposed to what eventually got filmed. This may also extend to some of the really big special editions with something special, like maybe a signed photo, or maybe a special like lithographic print. I've seen animated films that have included animation cells as part of a special edition. There are a lot of different things that you can include with those, even up to something like a figurine, or a collectible shirt, or a piece of memorabilia from the film. This is not something that I super get into myself. Some of the limited editions and extended editions of things I do have and I do really enjoy. The stuff that's a little more collectory items with the releases, I guess, is not necessarily my thing. But I do have some special editions of films that I really love that are adding something to it. I mentioned Billy Wilder's The Apartment. The copy I have on physical media is the one from Arrow Academy, which is a sub-label of Arrow Films that has not only a wonderful Blu-ray release of the film with a bunch of special features, it also has a really, really thick booklet in a great outer casing, kind of hard shell case. And it's a great read and it does deepen the knowledge of somebody that I do really enjoy. So even though it's not a thing I may seek out as much as some of the others, there are a lot of editions like that that I do really enjoy. And editions like that can come from companies like Arrow Films, and some of those labels, or even some specific film studios, are also things that collectors can really get into. And collecting by studio or by physical media label is incredibly popular. There are a lot of people that will latch on to a specific boutique label that produces stuff that they love. I mentioned horror movies before. If you are a big horror movie fan, you very likely, if you like low budget horror films, you've probably heard of the label Vinegar Syndrome. I mentioned them in my first episode as well. They produce these wonderful editions of a lot of horror films and give a lot of love to low budget horror films as well. So finding a maker of physical media that you really enjoy can really deepen your experience as a collector. If you find something like that and you enjoy them, a lot of times they're going to have stuff that's either similar, or maybe it's a label that you just trust their choices. So a company like the Criterion Collection, that is has been around forever. They're actually celebrating their 40th anniversary this year, starting way back in the Laserdisc days. They work to curate their collection in a certain kind of way, and I do want to talk about Criterion a little more in depth in probably my next episode. But if you get into the sort of thing that they do, then you very likely are going to enjoy other releases of theirs. You know, they put in a lot of effort for things like maybe unique artwork, or creating some of their own unique special features that maybe haven't been available on other versions of a film's release before, or again adding large booklets and essays and tapping some really knowledgeable people either in the film historian community or maybe in the critical community, or even just other filmmakers that are really inspired by some of these films to come in and write a piece or talk about them and how it's inspired them. Most of the time with these specialty physical media labels, they also put a lot of effort into really high quality releases as well. So if you're really interested in getting as good a possible version as you can of a film, oftentimes these labels are known for producing some of those. So if that is something you get interested in, seeking some of them out is potentially a way that may be interesting for you as a collector. There is also in some of those labels a little bit of like extra, I'll say quote unquote collector incentive, things like spine numbers. So I know Criterion does this. I know the Indicator line from Powerhouse Films does this. Radiance Films does this. I know I'm going to be forgetting some as well. But they do put numbers to each of their releases. So, you know, Criterion would have had a spine number 1, and now they're somewhere in the like 1300s, I believe. And, you know, if you get into the idea of wanting to collect of one of those certain labels, then, you know, having a number to them, it's like having a number on a baseball card or a Pokemon card of collecting all of the original 151 Pokemon. You know, you kind of have a way to organize yourself with it. It's those little collector-y things that some labels will also put in there that sometimes can catch a collector's eye or not. So it can be something that people really enjoy. And this is something I personally really enjoy as well. I've been collecting boutique labels for a really long time, starting with Criterion, and I'm trying to now even expand to looking at even more labels and finding ones that are creating releases that I might enjoy, and have discovered some really wonderful ones over the years and have kept up with what they're putting out and seeing if there's anything that I want to be checking out from them. So it is something that may not be the first thing that people get into with physical media, but chances are, if you do decide to get into the hobby, you probably will start to hear about them or find out about them with different editions of a movie that you do like, and maybe that's a gateway into coming into some of those. It is a fun way to collect. I really, as a cinephile, as somebody who enjoys the act of collecting, it's a fun time. The other sort of area of collecting that I came up with as far as this is a little bit more to do with money, and specifically the money that you choose to spend on your collection. And there's a lot of ways that you can, treat the money that you are wanting to use towards your collection. You can look at it as a real investment in something that is really, really high quality. And if that's the case, and that's something that you feel is really important to you, then perhaps you want to go about looking at collecting for the highest possible definition, or the best picture or best full-on experience that you can get with a physical media release. So maybe that means a collector's edition. Maybe that means you're trying to collect everything on 4K Ultra HD discs. Sometimes that's not always the case. Not everything is available on 4K. There's a growing number every week that do come out. But sometimes, if you are wanting to collect the best available, then maybe you start a little bit lower. And as something does come out, if it's only available on DVD and eventually they make a 4K of it, maybe you want to upgrade if that's the case. There's a lot of people that do that. And again, that's for if you really value that highest definition or highest quality that you can get, then going about it that way is most certainly a way to look at how you want to do your collection. You can also go to the exact opposite of that spectrum and do the collecting on a budget thing, and by trying to stretch your dollars out as far as they possibly will go. And in this case, you are a little more of that bargain hunter, that person that really enjoys the hunt of finding a great film that you love for a pretty cheap price. And the good news is there's lots of ways to do that. And let's talk about that a little bit as well. But if you are that person that maybe the highest definition doesn't matter so much, but you love a movie and you find a great DVD of it for $1, hey, maybe that's what you decide to go with. And if you want to upgrade later, that's maybe something you can find a Blu-ray of for, I don't know, $5 down the road at some point in time. You kind of get to choose how you want to do that. And I know I have a little bit of tendencies to both want something in the highest definition, but also budget stuff. There's some great films in my collection that I've gotten for a very cheap price and was very happy with that. And other ones that I sought after as high a quality as I possibly could. So my habits kind of tend to go somewhere in the middle or in between with that. Now, all of these different methods of collecting were just what I was able to come up with when I started thinking about the topic. I'm sure there are many, many other different ways that anybody goes about collecting their movies on physical media. And I'd be really interested to hear about what some of you do with the ways that you collect. I've been starting to do a little bit of interacting with both having these podcast episodes up on YouTube, as well as doing some posting on Reddit. I do also have an Instagram account at Cinema on a Shelf that I'd be really interested to hear from those of you listening about some other ways that you go about collecting your physical media. It's something that is really personal to everyone. And like I said, I do a lot of different versions of this, some more so than others. And I'd be really interested to hear what the rest of you are doing, or maybe if you're new to it, what you might be interested in doing starting out. Now I want to shift a little bit from the how in the collecting aspect to the where of the collecting. Where exactly can you go about finding movies on physical media? And this is something that has changed a lot over the course of the history of physical media. Dating back to VHS days, I remember that it was not always necessarily the easiest to get VHS just anywhere. there were certain places that you were more likely to find them. Sometimes in department stores, you may not necessarily see them, but more specialty stores, you might. Certainly in video rental stores when they were around, there was a lot of them that did also sell copies on VHS too. But I feel like with DVD since the late 90s, it seems like the DVD format and Blu-ray and 4K going forward, there's a lot easier avenue to have them available. I think maybe because they're a little bit thinner, easier to carry them in bulk as opposed to VHS, which is quite a bit thicker and heavier, obviously, as well. But that has changed over the last few decades, where you used to have a lot of different places that you could go and find movies. I mean, I'm pretty sure most people can remember a time where you could probably buy movies in grocery stores. I mean, there are still a few general places like that where you can find like small kiosks that have movies, but they're not anywhere near as prevalent as they used to be. So it's worth kind of taking a look at where you can build your collections at. And there's kind of primarily two different avenues that you can do this. One of them is in person, and the other one is online. We live in an online world. I'm speaking to you on a podcast, which is only really available because of the internet and it being so ubiquitous in all of our lives. So these are kind of the two methods that most people are purchasing any kind of goods these days. It's either going to be online or in person. And I want to just take a look at some of the different areas, both online and in person, that you can buy movies at. Each of these I kind of grouped a little bit to say that, both big stores, specialty stores, secondhand marketplaces, and direct from the actual providers, they are both available online as well as in person. And it's worth taking a look at that because, again, like I said, they're not as common as they used to be. As far as, I guess I'll maybe start in the online world here, since that's maybe the one that everybody is using more often for some of these specialty purchases these days. And start with some of the big stores, and quotes under big there. I'm mostly looking at larger department style stores that carry kind of a little bit of everything. And outside of a few places that maybe will have a few pieces of physical media here and there, I think there were three kind of big online marketplaces that I could identify that sort of fit into this, with the biggest of them at this point being Amazon. For better and for worse. Amazon is a pretty huge online retail presence most of the way across the world at this point. Again, whatever your thoughts are about shopping with Amazon or not shopping with Amazon, or what you'd prefer to do, I'm not here to tell you that one is better than another, although I do have some of my own personal recommendations. Amazon is not only a really big player in that space, but it also has the ability to have large warehouse spaces that you can get goods directly from. And because they are such an online presence, the need for them to also have a physical storefront isn't there like some of the other places with an online marketplace have. So they can really concentrate on a huge volume of product. And for something like physical media, sometimes it does mean that it can be the easiest place to find certain things. Certainly, if you're looking at something that's a little bit more popular, you may be able to find it at a few different places, but the more you get into something that's a little bit more niche, or if you're looking for a range of formats between DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K, Amazon is very likely going to be the spot that's going to give you the biggest selection. So again, everybody has their own preferences as far as whether they like to shop on Amazon or not. Personally, I have ordered quite a bit of stuff on Amazon. I know there are some types of releases that are a little bit easier to find there. or potentially may go on sale there at different times, again, depending on the time of year and what you're looking at. But Amazon is one of those things that is a presence in our current global community and is kind of the biggest of the quote unquote big online retailers. Other than that, the other ones that I came up with were two that have a little bit more of a presence, I guess, in North America, and in one case specifically to the United States. One of them being Walmart and the other one being Target. These are two stores that I'll mention again as also having in-person brick and mortar locations, but they do also have a pretty big presence online as far as being able to order stuff from a Walmart or a Target marketplace that will ship it directly to you. They do also keep physical media and movies in stock, more so than some of the other larger stores similar to them. They do tend to, I wouldn't say put a premium on it, but pretty much every Walmart and Target that you go into, they're going to have an area of like an entertainment section, which is going to have physical copies of usually movies, probably some music and records, probably some video games as well. So the online marketplaces for those two places are also an example of big retailers that do have an online presence. You likely won't quite find the selection at Walmart and Target that you would at Amazon. You can find everything from very, very niche releases to the biggest of the big titles on Amazon, whereas at Walmart or Target, you're probably not going to find the latest and greatest from Arrow Films or Shout Factory. But if you're looking for something put out by Disney or Warner Brothers, they're probably going to have it at a place like that. The next kind of area of online presences that I could think of are what I'm going to term as specialty stores. In my head, these are the sort of marketplaces that have a more specific focus than a full generalized we have anything and everything like the big retailers do. Again, depending on the region of the world that you're in, this is also usually going to be a little bit unique because some places may only ship to certain areas in the world. Some of them may do a little more worldwide shipping. One that I know is a definite name in the physical media space is the US-based bookstore Barnes & Noble. And they've made a real name for themselves over the number of years for, carrying a little bit more than books. They're a traditional book retailer with physical locations across the US. But they also, a lot of times in their stores, and I've been to several of them in my life, have some sort of a physical media section, usually with CDs and records and Blu-rays, DVDs, and 4Ks at this point. They also do usually carry some other things like board games and a few other things that kind of fall into that entertainment area that isn't quite books or magazines, which is their typical bread and butter. But they also have actually done quite a bit as far as making things in the space for physical media that are a little more niche or a little bit more of the boutique label stuff. One of the reasons I think they are probably so widely known at this point is their years-long running partnership with the Criterion Collection, where twice a year, every July and November, they run a 50% off Criterion sale, where for about 3 or 4 weeks, they basically have everything from Criterion on half off. And this has been a sale that's been going on for a very long time now. And they've also done similar sales with other providers. I know with Arrow Films, they do these at different times, whether it's half off or other percentages of things off. Recently, they also did one with Radiance Films, which I think is the first time they've done a 50% off with Radiance Films. I was actually able to pick a few things up as a Canadian buyer. They sometimes don't always ship to Canada. That has changed over the years. I did used to buy a lot more stuff from Barnes & Noble on some of these sales, and sometimes the shipping on them is US only. The Radiant sale wasn't, so I was actually able to pick up a few things as my very first Radiance Films pieces of my collection. So really interested to dive into those. But, Barnes & Noble is an example of a specialty store, although it is quite big and, nationwide across the US. There are a lot of locations. They also do have a little bit of notoriety around the world as far as what they can ship internationally in terms of physical media movies. Up in Canada, where I am, there is one very specific to Canada that also gets really involved with the physical media space. It's kind of the only thing they do, and that's a company called Unobstructed View, which is based out of the Greater Toronto area. And they are essentially an online-only business that sells nothing but movies. Absolutely nothing but movies. Unless I'm mistaken there, and I don't know if anybody from Unobstructed View will listen to this, but if I'm incorrect in that, please let me know. They are the ones that, whereas Barnes & Noble with Criterion, they have their 50% off sale. During those times, Unobstructed View also does Criterion sales at that point. The pricing is obviously a little bit different because it is a US-based product that is coming over the border, so there's certain shipping and tariffs that go along with that. But they do run sales parallel to what happens with Barnes & Noble's sales. They do also run sales parallel to Criterion's own flash sales. So Criterion does sell on their own website, and when they do that, whether it's a 24-hour flash sale or maybe a weekend sale of some kind, Unobstructed View will run sales that coincide with that because they do partner with Criterion as their Canadian distributor. So they're a place that I have ordered a lot of things from over the past number of years. They do a pretty good job of keeping things up to date. Obviously, being in Canada, most of the things that they're selling are not manufactured in Canada and don't originate in Canada. So they're not necessarily the place you would go the day of a release to buy something there. A lot of times it may take them a little bit, or maybe they're taking a pre-order for something that is eventually going to come into their warehouse. But it does serve the Canadian market as far as a lot of those more niche physical media releases, but also some generalized things as well. So yeah, shout out to Unobstructed View. I've been a customer of theirs for a number of years now. There are also a few smaller specialty online stores that do offer up a good amount of movies on physical media. And by no means do I have any kind of exhaustive list on here, but the one that did pop into my head as I was brainstorming this is Deep Discount, which is an online retailer also based in the US that oftentimes is running pretty good sales as far as different things they have on offer. I'm not exactly sure how their business model works. Wasn't able to dive into it too much to see if it was overstock or where exactly the name Deep Discount kind of originates from. They do have a pretty good selection of a lot of different stuff and do run different sales at different times, sometimes site-wide, sometimes specific to a genre or a provider or studio. They also do sell music and a few other different types of media on their website, so they're a specialty store that does branch out a little bit in the way that Barnes & Noble does. But they do have a presence with their own website. They do also sell on secondhand marketplaces. They do have a lot of their product available on eBay as well. So it is somewhere that I know people do buy from with some regularity if that's more of their thing. It's worth checking out a little bit for sure. I have bought a couple of things from Deep Discount at different times, although I think recently it has more so been off of some of their marketplace links than their actual website. There are also some other ones that go even a little bit more into niches. Again, I don't really have an exhaustive list here, but one example I could think of in this area is Diabolic DVD, which is a little more of an online retailer for the niche horror, cult classics, science fiction, something slightly left of center, a little bit weirder than you might find in any of those other spots. They tend to specialize in having those and partner with some providers that do have some of these types of releases. So if you're someone that is potentially interested in collecting by some of those genres or likes the weirder, more niche cult classic-y stuff, websites like Diabolic DVD can be a really great source for you online for those specialty stores. There are also some smaller brick and mortar stores that do have an online presence as well in the physical media space. There's definitely a few of these that exist in kind of various areas. I'm thinking of places like Orbit DVD, which has a storefront based in Asheville, North Carolina. It's places like Amoeba Music, which is the kind of music mega stores based around the Los Angeles and San Francisco areas. They do have a pretty deep selection of movies to go along with the records and CDs that they have as well. And other places that maybe are smaller stores that may just be able to have set up some kind of distribution. One I specifically want to shout out that I've actually been to their store in Vancouver up here in Canada is called Videomatica. They are a really fun little store that also are able to sell things, I think internationally, but I've definitely looked at stuff to buy and get shipped to me within Canada, and they seem to be able to, drill down into some of those niches, as well as I think do a little bit of selling of some of the stuff that comes through used or secondhand to them. So yeah, shout out to Videomatica. It's a great store if you're ever in the Vancouver area and you are a movie junkie. Definitely look up Videomatica. But they're in another example of, a specialty store, a smaller store that also has been able to get an online marketplace or an online presence up and running to be able to ship things, which I know some stores were able to do that a little bit more kind of from 2020 to 2022 during the pandemic to help them get through not being able to be open to the public. And, some of those have continued and I think still do pretty okay. So yeah, shout out to any of those. And again, I know I'm missing a whole bunch within the specialty online store area there, but it's a few examples to talk about with it. When you're talking about online marketplaces for things, the secondhand online marketplaces are some of the first things that I know a lot of people will think of. These are places like eBay and Facebook Marketplace, others that are sort of maybe a little more classified style, like Craigslist in the United States, other parts of North America as well, or Kijiji, which being Canadian, that is sort of a version of Craigslist that is a little bit more widely used in Canada. These secondhand marketplaces are places where kind of anybody can sell different goods. You can go onto eBay and find just about everything. I mean, they've even started selling cars at this point on eBay, which is a little bit wild to me since, eBay's been around since the 1990s and it started out as an online auction marketplace where you would put something as available, and usually for about 7 days they would have an auction, or a silent auction style, I guess you would call it, where you would put up a bid as to what you were willing to pay for something, and then if you won that bid, you paid the seller usually via a money order or something. My God, how did we do these things in the 90s? It's kind of wild. And then it would be shipped out to you. So it was a long process, certainly at that point in time. And eBay has now evolved into a really unique kind of marketplace where a lot of people will sell stuff that is new. Even more people will sell stuff that is pre-owned or used. A lot of people will also go on and run entire online businesses off of an eBay store of their own. It has also become a thing that has incorporated both auction styles as well as just what they call buy it now, but essentially just an online marketplace where you list a price, you show what the shipping cost is, and people can pay for that item just like they would on any other online store. So it has evolved over time. It is something that I know myself as a collector, I have used quite a bit because it does allow you to get into some of the secondhand or used goods that maybe are tougher to find brand new, maybe don't even exist really brand new anymore. You can find out of print DVDs and Blu-rays and 4Ks on eBay, which, has some pitfalls of maybe being a little more expensive, but it's maybe one of the only places that you can find some of those unless you get incredibly lucky when you're looking in person. Facebook Marketplace is a little bit more of that online style of a flea market or a garage sale where people can take photos and kind of list stuff with whatever asking price they have in a certain area, and you'd have to message them to sort of work out a deal and work out a place to meet up with people and exchange goods and money for whatever's agreed upon. It's something that a lot of people use for a lot of different things, just like eBay. And oftentimes you can find people that are offering very good deals on Facebook Marketplace. I have found a lot of movie lots on Facebook Marketplace that I've been really interested in. Sometimes it's maybe a lot of 20 films where there's 3 or 4 that are the only ones that I really want, but the price is really good on them. A lot of people do treat it like more of a garage sale and are looking to clear things out or to kind of declutter, that sort of thing. And as opposed to maybe donating them to a local thrift store, maybe trying to see if anybody can pay them a little bit of money for things. So sometimes you can find crazy stuff on Facebook Marketplace in terms of movies and physical media, especially if somebody is clearing out some space for them. Of course, with any of these sort of things where you might be exchanging goods and information and meeting places, make sure that you're taking all the right precautions and being safe and protecting your own privacy and information as you see fit. The other online location as far as where you can collect some of these Blu-rays and DVDs and 4Ks is to actually order them directly from some of the providers and some of the studios and labels. Most of them are very likely going to have an online presence on their own website. Especially if you look at the boutique labels, you name it: Criterion, Kino Lorber, Vinegar Syndrome, Powerhouse Films, which has the Indicator line, Arrow Films, Shout Factory, Scream Factory. All of these and far, far more have an online store where you can order directly from them. You don't have to worry about going through the middleman process of it going to Amazon or to Walmart or to Barnes & Noble or anywhere else like that. You can order it directly from them. So you're only paying the shipping cost from that to them. I really like this as a method, and I wish it was something that was a little bit more feasible for me as a Canadian. A lot of the labels are based in the United States or the United Kingdom or Australia or other places where sometimes shipping costs can be prohibitively expensive. And it's too bad because I really... This actually stems from me being a music fan, and specifically a fan of a lot of independent music on record labels that are not major labels. I would really dearly love to buy directly from them more than I currently am able to, because sometimes the shipping doubles the price of a record that I want to get from somewhere in the world, and it's kind of unfortunate, but so I'll wait for it to come in to one of my local stores. But sometimes there are really good sales that some of these labels are going to run that do make it worth it for someone like myself. And if you're in an area where you may be able to put in an order that qualifies for free shipping, or it's cheaper shipping because it's within your own country, ordering directly from these labels online can be a really good way to find good deals and also directly support those labels. And if you're the kind of person that gets into wanting to collect from somewhere like this, I really personally like the idea of giving your monetary support directly to them. You know, a lot of people may have qualms about some of the bigger retailers. You are still buying a product from, you know, the original label that is going to get money for it, but you may not love that you're also giving money to one of the big retailers as well. And that's where ordering directly from a label can be really nice. It means that you're showing support directly to them. And I do really like that. And I wish it was a little more feasible for me than it is most times at the moment in this case. That sort of looks at online purchases. And online is, there's a lot of advantages to looking for things online. Obviously, the selection that's available, the ability to maybe pre-order a release that you know is about to come out and you are really looking forward to and want to secure a copy of. Not everywhere does pre-orders, but if they do, that's something that you can work on as well. The one thing about purchasing online is that it's an act that you're doing where you're sitting in front of your computer or on your phone to do. And there is something about the in-person experience as far as the whole idea of shopping, our late stage capitalism goes. It's a very funny kind of, intangible, I guess you would call it, part of the purchasing experience that we do lose a little bit of with online searches, where you don't quite get the thrill of being able to flip through a bunch of movies or wander through a store and look what they might have in a display case or on walls. I'm probably being more romantic about this than a lot of people are, but personally I do really like the in-person shopping experience, especially when it comes to something niche like physical media. So anytime I get the chance to do it, I do really enjoy it. And so I did want to talk about where you can find movies on disc in person starting in 2025, which is when I am recording this now, but what it's looking like now. And again, this has definitely changed in the landscape. Like I said, you used to be able to find them in grocery stores. Now, a little harder. So if you're looking for somewhere like a big retailer, as I mentioned, Amazon doesn't have storefronts for their goods and services for the most part. So the places that you're going to find it are those big department stores. And I mentioned Walmart and Target in the United States. You will be able to go in there and find a certain amount of physical copies of movies at both of those. Obviously subject to what they're going to be having available on hand, which is always the downfall of shopping in person. You're not guaranteed to find something, even though you're not guaranteed online either, but maybe you have a better chance because there's a larger storefront. You take that risk, I guess, if you're going in person. Unfortunately, at this point, I was really trying to come up with any other quote-unquote big retailers where you can find movies. And this took a really big hit a couple of years ago, especially in North America, where Best Buy, who is the biggest entertainment technology retailer across North America, made it known that they were going to be phasing out physical media, both in their stores and in their online shops. And this, I think, I know when it happened, a lot of people were kind of sounding the death knell, or were very concerned about whether or not physical media was going to be completely going extinct, because Best Buy had jumped the shark and they were a really big source of where you could buy movies, and it made sense for an entertainment and a technology store like that. You could buy a Blu-ray player at Best Buy. In fact, I'm pretty sure you still can buy Blu-ray players and 4K players at Best Buy, but you can't buy the movies anymore. And that was a really strange sort of time to be a collector, because I think a lot of people were a bit doom and gloom about it. And it turns out that so far, none of the other really, really big retailers have done the same thing. It maybe just highlighted that a lot of them had already phased this out, and that Best Buy was just maybe the biggest name in a long time to do it. I don't know. But the in-person shopping experience for physical media at this point in time is pretty limited. And again, your mileage is going to vary. I know personally in Canada, there really isn't anywhere. We have Best Buys here. That was where a lot of times I would go to find movies. At one point, we did also have another technology store called Future Shop that Best Buy bought about a decade ago or more. And they all turned into Best Buy stores. And then when they stopped carrying movies, they were the biggest retailer that had them like that. So it was a little bit of a blow to certain marketplaces. And, whether the slack has been fully picked up or not, probably not just yet because of online marketplaces taking the place of it. Thankfully for people like me, it's not all doom and gloom for in-person shopping for physical media. And this is where the specialty stores are really still, pulling the weight for collectors of physical media. And I've mentioned Barnes and Noble already. In the United States, they are a really, really big presence. I've never been into a Barnes and Noble and them not had a section that had movies in it. I'm sure they exist, but personally, the I don't know, half dozen or so that I've been to in my travels going to the US, they've always seemed to have something, whether they were small or large. I could go in and find physical media somewhere in their stores. And because they're a specialty store, they usually were able to have a pretty decently curated selection as well, which is really, really nice. In Canada, the version that we have for that, as far as movies go, is a company called Sunrise Records. Now, there's a little bit of history as far as the Canadian marketplace goes, because this used to be HMV, which was a big brand in not only Canada, but also in the UK, and actually still exists in the UK, and maybe in Europe. If I have any listeners listening in mainland Europe and you have HMVs throughout there as well, please let me know, or any other stores that are similar to it. But we used to find HMVs all the time, especially in mall settings in Canada. And they were the ones that would have a lot of music, mostly on CD at that point in time, and movies on DVD and eventually Blu-ray. And 4K wasn't quite as much around before HMV went under. They declared bankruptcy and decided to close all of their stores. That was a bit of a dark time. I know some people with the Best Buy part were really doom and gloom. I loved HMV personally. I shopped at HMV for years and years and decades before they went under. And that was a real blow to the marketplace in Canada. And a smaller music store, which is Ontario based, called Sunrise Records, took HMV closing as an opportunity to scale up. And they actually took over a good amount of these mall spaces across Canada. Before, I believe they maybe had about a dozen stores scattered throughout Ontario. And pretty much overnight, they were able to get into that same market space that HMV was in mall spaces, and keep selling CDs, continue to sell more vinyl records. In fact, they usually have quite a good selection of vinyl records these days too. They also had a lot of merchandise and t-shirts and things that were sort of pop culture related that HMV had gotten into as well. And movies on physical media, which most of the Sunrise Records that you can go into these days are also going to have a relatively decent selection of physical media. Some of the stores even have a decent selection of some of the more niche stuff, the special editions, your Criterions, your Kino Lorbers, your Arrow Videos. They're going to have a decent selection of that a lot of the time. So they have picked up a little bit of the slack that was left from HMV in the Canadian marketplace, at least. I know there would have been a little bit from somewhere like Tower Records in the United States, and Tower Records still do exist in places like Japan, and not ever having been to Japan myself, I don't know what they have as far as their movie selections go, but I'm pretty sure a lot of places throughout the world have some form of specialty store that does still have a presence, whether it's a movies and music store crossover that takes place in mall settings or in other shopping areas. I think they everywhere has something specific like that. And if they don't, a lot of times they are also probably going to have some sort of local small business that does offer a little bit of this as well. Now, I mentioned a place like Videomatica in Vancouver. They are a wonderful niche store that kind of does movies only. A lot of times you will find these small businesses that have movies as part of their business model with doing a lot of other things. I know music stores, record stores, quite often will have a small section for movies as well as music being part of their larger business. A lot of video game stores as well. And I actually want to shout out a local store for me in Calgary, Alberta, Video Game Trader, which is, I think, one of the largest video game storefronts in Canada, which is pretty cool that they were able to find a space that was open up to be that large. And they've always had a relatively robust area with movies, most of which are second-hand movies, but they do also carry a good amount of brand new stuff as well. They do have a little bit of a focus with some of their brand new stuff on some of the niche markets, so they see people like me coming a mile away, I imagine. But they also have a lot of people on staff that are very, very knowledgeable. They're all cinephiles, and anytime I go in there to look at movies or purchase any movies, most of the times I'm having a really fun conversation about that movie or maybe something else that's related to it, or maybe asking, oh, I haven't seen that with this movie you're buying, what's it about? Because they want to know about it. So I love Video Game Trader. Shout out to them. These types of stores are really great for kind of the local cinema collector community, and the video game collecting community, I think, has a lot of parallels to it. So video game stores sometimes are the ones where you can also find movies as well. I know other areas like Game Exchange in the southern part of the United States also tends to have a lot of movies. A lot of smaller video game stores that I've been to, a good amount of them do have some kind of movie presence as well, although it is mostly a second-hand presence at that point. That second-hand marketplace presence also lives outside of some of those other stores, to just kind of generalize second-hand brick and mortar marketplaces. Places like thrift stores are usually flush with movies. Movies are something that often gets donated because, people for a long time, when the streaming services started, kind of got rid of their movie collections because they didn't see a lot of value to having them anymore. So oftentimes, if you're going into a local Goodwill or a local Salvation Army or even just an independent thrift store, you have a really good chance of finding at least a small section of DVDs and maybe even some Blu-rays or better. And a lot of times they are at very, very, very affordable prices. You can really do well with building a movie collection at thrift stores, especially if you're looking for stuff that is maybe a little bit more on the popular side. This is the stuff that, tended to be in a lot of people's homes in, 2005, when DVDs were a really big thing and almost everybody had a player in their home. Nowadays, they're something that often you will see donated to thrift stores. So they can be a real, gold mine in some spots for finding physical media. I know, man, I have some of the movies that I have found at thrift stores for just a couple of bucks or less is pretty amazing. You can run across some stuff that has been long out of print, or have someone that, had a niche collection of a certain type of movie, and you just run across a whole bunch of everything. I can recall very vividly going into my local Goodwill a few years ago and running across an absolute treasure trove of old classic Hollywood westerns. Everything from Warner Archive DVDs to collections of Roy Rogers movie. Like, it was wild. I probably walked out of there with 50 DVDs that day. So thrift stores are really great secondhand marketplaces to find movies. Whether or not you'll find what you want is another story, and sometimes it takes a little bit of patience, but they can be really great sources for finding physical media. as can places like garage sales and flea markets. These are obviously a little bit more infrequent. Garage sales oftentimes are happening, well, from where I am, in the spring and summer, and maybe a little bit into the fall time. Other areas of the world, they may have garage sales, 365 days a year, every single weekend of the year. And they can also be places that people will put out a box of movies and allow you to go through and pay not a whole lot of money for them. So, as long as you can find a disc that is in decent enough condition, or maybe isn't scratched too badly, and you can get resurfaced and it will play just fine. After doing that, then they can also be really great places to find movies. Again, you do have to have a little bit of patience, and you do have to go sometimes hunting a little bit for what you want, but can be really fun. In the same sort of vein as a thrift store might be something like a pawn shop, where things are getting sold back to the pawn shop, or sold to the pawn shop, pardon me, and they are selling them at a profit as a second-hand retailer. Pawn shops, I have not necessarily been into a ton of pawn shops. Often they're going to have movies. It can be a little bit hit or miss as to what exactly they have. Some of them I've been into, and they actually have very good selections, but they do also know a bit of what they have, and maybe if they're getting a lot of out-of-print stuff, then you might pay up a little bit for it, but they also are somewhere to potentially consider in the secondhand marketplace. I mentioned small sections within other specialty stores like music and record stores, video games, even bookstores sometimes may have movie sections of things that have been donated along with other books that have come in. One that is an interesting one that I actually would really like to explore a little bit more myself is the idea of conventions or fan expos that are a little bit more geared towards movies, or maybe entertainment, or other types of physical media. I've been very frequently to conventions for retro video games that are like this, where they have huge areas where vendors can buy tables for the weekend and sell retro video games. So everything from the Atari all the way to the modern stuff in the Nintendo Switch or the PlayStation 5. And I love these expos, being a video game fan, also a retro video game fan. I love them because, I can go find a bunch of the old cartridges that I had when I was a kid, and there's a nostalgia factor to that for sure. And at some of those conventions, they may also have a little bit of movies as well. And I know that there are expos and conventions out there that are a little bit more tailored to movies and movie collectors specifically. I need to do more research myself and see where some of these expos are taking place, what they are all about, if it's something that they're providing a full-on experience, or if it's more of a specialty flea market type of situation. I need to do a little bit of research with that. And actually, if anyone listening has been to anything like this, like a specific convention or expo where there was a real bent to physical media and movies, I would love to hear about it, because I'm very intrigued by this as a possibility. As far as the direct from label purchasing in person, this one is a little bit more difficult, because most of the time the labels and the things that I talked about earlier on, they don't typically have storefronts available. A lot of times they are publishers or distributors of the discs that are manufactured in different parts of the world, and they are going to be having a warehouse space that then gets shipped out to other retailers or done through their own online store. Not a lot of them open up their own brick and mortar stores. There is one notable exception to this that I was able to discover, and that is the label Vinegar Syndrome. Mentioned them earlier in this episode, also mentioned them in my first episode. They are a place that has actually gone from not just being an online distributor and a manufacturer of discs, but also have opened up 3 different physical locations. One of them is in Bridgeport, Connecticut in the US, which is actually where their big warehouse is. They've opened up sort of an offshoot of that called the Archive, where they do sell their discs and the discs from their partner labels right there to any customers that are able to go to the store, which is really quite unique. I know I've seen this with record labels. I've been to, for example, in Seattle, Washington, I've been to the Sub Pop Records stores in downtown Seattle, as well as in the Seattle airport, which is wild to think that there's a record store in an airport, but I was very, very here for it. And so Vinegar Syndrome has opened up the archive in Bridgeport. They also have 2 other physical locations under the name Vinegar Syndrome. There's one based in Toronto, which as a Canadian consumer makes me very, very excited to hopefully potentially visit it one day. And recently they have reopened a location in Colorado. Their newly reopened store is based in Denver. And I believe they did have a different store that was open, I believe, in Aurora, Colorado, which is just outside of Denver. But the Denver location has very, very recently been reopened, which is really great to hear about. But Vinegar Syndrome, being that it's a label that does have a really niche bent to a lot of the stuff that they release under their label name, because they do have a lot of other partner labels, they, that support other different styles, different documentaries, different, animated films, children's films, drama stuff, it's stuff a little bit more, I guess what you would call important cinema. That's the wrong term for it, but stuff that's a little more of, maybe something that a serious actor might have been in as opposed to a low budget horror film. They do have all of these available at these stores and more, I believe. I do follow the Toronto store on Instagram, and I do see that they get used Blu-rays and DVDs in all the time, as well as new stock from Vinegar Syndrome and their partner labels. So that's a really interesting concept. I kind of love that. And, I can see why it's not something that every label would want to open up. But, for them, I think it so far seems to be working. And it's really, really nice to see that they can be supported in person as well as just online. As far as that discussion goes for today, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'd love to hear and keep the discussion going in comments if you're listening to this on YouTube, or if you do have any other places that you wanted to share with me. I often will be sharing these episodes on Reddit at different places where you can talk about physical media, and also on Instagram, which I mentioned. Cinema on a Shelf is the Instagram account that I have for this podcast. You can also reach me if you wanted to see what I'm watching. I have a Letterboxd account. It is at Maddie236. And that is going to do it for the second episode of talking about collecting your own way, and both the how and the where to go about collecting. In my next episode, I do want to take a little bit more of a focus onto one specific label. I've talked about them a few different times, and they are, as I mentioned, celebrating a 40th anniversary this year of being in the physical media game. And I think in my third episode, I'd like to take a little bit more of a deep dive into the Criterion Collection. Until next time, my name is Matt. Thank you very much for spending the time with me today, and I hope to see you again. Take care.